Hey guys, tonight we begin with something very simple and very calm. A normal night in medieval Europe. No alarms, no glowing screens, no late-night emails gently ruining tomorrow. Just darkness, stone walls, and the quiet understanding that if something goes wrong after sunset, it is probably staying wrong until morning. So go ahead and dim the lights, settle into whatever position your spine currently tolerates, and let this one drift along. And if you enjoy calm stories like this, you're welcome to subscribe. It helps keep these quiet histories alive, and then we can all continue pretending time moves slower than it actually does. Now, when people imagine medieval Europe, they usually picture the daytime. Markets, knights clanking around like cutlery in a drawer, peasants heroically inventing back pain. The night, however, was a very different place. And by different, we mean aggressively dark, deeply inconvenient, and mildly haunted by everything you could not see but were very sure was there. The sun goes down early, much earlier than anyone is emotionally prepared for, especially in winter, when the day gives up around mid-afternoon like it has other plans. Once that happens, the world does not gently dim, it drops fast. There is no ambient glow, no streetlights, no windows politely glowing from inside. Just the moon, if it feels like cooperating, and the stars, which are beautiful but famously bad at helping you not trip over livestock. Most people end their day shortly after sunset, not because they're virtuous, but because there is nothing left to do that is worth the risk of falling into something unpleasant. Candles exist, yes, but they are expensive, smoky, and limited. Burning one casually is a small but real financial decision. Tallow candles smell like regret. Beeswax candles are for churches, monasteries, and people who think God is watching their budget closely. So homes go dark. Fires are banked low. The warmth lingers for a bit, then slowly retreats. Families gather, not out of coziness, but because clustering reduces the odds of something nibbling on you. The medieval night is quiet in a way modern people rarely experience. No engines, no distant traffic, just wind, animals, the occasional human cough, and sounds that may or may not be something standing too close. Let's start in a peasant household, because that's most households. The home is small. 1 or 2 rooms if fortune has smiled generously. The animals are inside or right next to the structure. This is not sentimental. This is insulation. Cows, goats, and chickens give off heat and noise, which is reassuring in its own way. If the animals stop making noise, that is when you worry. Beds are not beds yet. They are straw pallets, sacks, or wooden frames if you are doing unusually well. Everyone sleeps together. Parents, children, sometimes extended relatives, sometimes strangers. Privacy is not a concept that has made it this far. The night is cold and bodies are useful. Children fall asleep quickly, exhausted from work and existing. Adults follow because tomorrow starts early and being tired is not optional. Sleep itself is different. People do not sleep straight through the night. They have what historians politely call segmented sleep. You fall asleep after dark, you wake up a few hours later, you exist for a bit, you pray, you think, you stare into the darkness and consider your life choices. Then you go back to sleep until morning. This is normal. This is expected. Waking in the night does not mean insomnia. It means you are medieval. Outside, the village is still. Paths are unlit. Roads are suggestions at best. If you are traveling at night, it is because something has gone very wrong, or you are about to make it worse. Most people do not go out unless absolutely necessary. Night is when accidents happen. Night is when disputes escalate. Night is when you fall into ditches that were not there during the day, but definitely are now. Now let's slowly drift toward the town. Towns are larger, louder, and somehow even darker. Houses are packed tightly together, streets are narrow, waste is everywhere, literally everywhere. Chamber pots are emptied into the street, often with a polite warning shouted into the darkness, which you may or may not hear in time. Smells settle in the cool air and do not leave. Shops are closed, taverns linger a bit longer, glowing weakly from within like tired eyes refusing to shut. Inside, candles flicker. Conversations are low. Ale flows because it is safer than water and cheaper than happiness. This is where you find people who do not want to go home yet, or who do not have much of a home to go to. Town guards patrol slowly. They are not especially effective. They carry lanterns, which illuminate roughly 3 feet of ground, and announce their presence to anyone with bad intentions. Crime still happens. It just happens quietly. Doors are barred early. Windows are shuttered. People hope for morning. Church bells mark time even at night. Monasteries and convents keep strict hours. Monks rise in the dark to pray. They chant softly while the rest of the world sleeps, which is either comforting or unsettling depending on your perspective. Religious life does not pause at night. If anything, it leans into it. Let's ease our way toward the castle now, because while everyone else is trying to sleep through the dark, the elite are having a slightly different experience. Not necessarily better, just more complicated. A medieval castle at night is a layered thing. Thick walls hold in heat poorly, but keep out enemies fairly well. Torches burn along corridors, casting uneven light that stretches shadows into unsettling shapes. Guards stand watch. Some are alert. Some are thinking about how cold they are. Some are wondering how they ended up here instead of asleep near a fire. Inside, the great hall is quiet. Earlier, it would have been filled with noise, food, and the gentle chaos of too many people with opinions. Now it is empty, tables cleared, rushes on the floor trampled flat and holding on to every smell of the day. The fire is low, glowing red, barely fighting the chill. The lord of the castle retires to his chamber. It is large, drafty, and not nearly as luxurious as it will be in later centuries. His bed is raised, curtained, and shared. Privacy remains elusive even here. Servants sleep nearby. Guards are stationed outside the door. Being powerful does not mean being alone. Nights are when the body reminds medieval elites of their fragility. Old injuries ache. Poor diets catch up quietly. Teeth throb. Joints complain. There is no quick relief, no painkillers beyond alcohol, herbs, and prayer. Sleep comes, but it is light and easily broken. Somewhere else in the castle, the lady of the household lies awake longer. Candlelight flickers as she finishes prayers. She thinks about alliances, children, survival. Marriages are political. Nights are often anxious. Childbirth looms for many women like a recurring threat. Each pregnancy is a gamble. Each night is another step toward whatever outcome fate has chosen. Children sleep clustered together, watched by servants. Some are healthy, some are not. Medieval childhood is fragile. Night is when fevers rise, when coughing worsens, when parents wait and listen, counting breaths in the dark. Outside the walls, the countryside stretches into darkness. Forests become something else entirely at night. Paths vanish. Familiar landmarks dissolve. Wolves move more freely. So do people with reasons not to be seen. The medieval imagination fills the dark with stories, spirits, demons, witches, fair folk. Whether or not these exist is less important than the fact that everyone believes something does. Nighttime fear is not dramatic. It is quiet. It sits in the chest. It encourages people to stay where they are. It keeps communities small and routines tight.
Darkness shapes behavior. And yet, night is also when the sky opens up. Without light pollution, the stars are overwhelming. The Milky Way stretches across the heavens like a pale road. People notice this. They do not understand it the way we do, but they feel its weight. The universe looks bigger at night. God feels closer or farther, depending on the evening. Time passes slowly. Bells ring. Watches change. Fires dim further. Eventually, the eastern sky lightens almost imperceptibly. Birds begin to stir. Roosters take their job very seriously. The world prepares to do it all again. This is a normal night in medieval Europe. Not dramatic, not romantic, just dark, quiet, and full of small, manageable anxieties. And as we keep drifting forward, we'll start to notice how this darkness shapes the people who rule it, the kings who fear it, the queens who endure it, and the children born into it, expected to survive long enough to inherit something deeply inconvenient.
As the night settles fully in, the world does not go silent so much as it rearranges its noises. This is something medieval people understand instinctively. Day sounds are busy and human. Night sounds feel personal, like they are aimed at you specifically. A floorboard creaks, and suddenly it is a message. The wind pushes against a shutter, and it feels intentional. Somewhere, an animal makes a noise it absolutely did not make earlier, and now everyone is awake. Smell becomes more noticeable at night, too. Without the distraction of movement and light, everything lingers. Smoke from hearth fires clings to hair and clothes. Damp stone smells like cold patience. Animals smell like animals, which is not subtle. In towns, the air holds layers of waste, old food, leather, sweat, and whatever the tannery has been up to that day. At night, these smells stop blending and start introducing themselves one by one. Inside homes, people breathe slowly. Sleeping is a skill you learn early. You learn how to lie still, how to ignore discomfort, how to accept that something is touching your foot and it might be a sibling, or it might not be, and you will find out in the morning. Blankets are heavy, itchy, and precious. Fleas are everywhere. This is not a special infestation. This is just life. Fire is watched carefully. An unattended flame is dangerous, but letting it go out completely means waking up to frost on the inside of the walls. Someone gets up during the night to adjust it. This is done quietly. Nobody wants sparks. Nobody wants to knock something over. Houses burn easily. People know this. Everyone has heard stories. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks. This is both reassuring and alarming. Dogs bark for reasons. Sometimes those reasons are thieves, sometimes wolves, sometimes the dog is just like that. Still, people listen. If the barking continues, someone may wake fully. A door is checked, a prayer is whispered. Eventually, the barking stops, and the night reclaims its quiet. Let's drift back toward the town again, because towns at night have their own rhythm. Curfews exist in many places. Bells ring to mark when it's time to be indoors, not because the authorities are joyless, but because nighttime is when fires start and arguments turn serious. After curfew, being outside is suspicious by default. The streets are uneven. Mud hardens, waste cools. A thin mist sometimes forms, especially near rivers. It moves slowly, low to the ground, catching whatever light the moon provides. Shapes shift. Even familiar streets look wrong. This is how people get lost 3 minutes from home. Watchmen call out the hour. They announce that all is well, even when it probably isn't. This is meant to be comforting. It mostly reminds people that time is passing. Somewhere, someone answers the call. Somewhere else, no one does, and that absence hangs for a moment before dissolving. In inns and taverns, the last guests linger. Conversations soften, voices lower, candle stubs burn down to nothing. The innkeeper starts gently encouraging people to leave, which means staring at them until they feel bad enough to stand up. Doors are barred after closing. The building settles. Someone sleeps on the floor because they paid for ale, not a bed. Travelers who must move at night do so carefully. A merchant caught on the road after dark is a nervous thing. He listens constantly. Every sound is a potential problem. He avoids forests if he can. If he cannot, he moves quickly, eyes forward, hoping nothing steps into his path. Banditry is not constant, but the possibility is enough. Let's ease outward again, into the countryside, where darkness feels deeper. Fields vanish at night. Fences become invisible. The land flattens into uncertainty. People who work the land know every inch of it by day, but at night familiarity fades. Holes appear where there were none. Streams sneak up on you. Farmhouses are isolated pools of light, briefly, before candles go out. Once they do, the building becomes part of the dark. Smoke from the chimney is the only sign of life, and even that fades. Inside, people listen to the wind pass through cracks in the walls. The house moves. Wood expands and contracts. This is normal. It still sounds like something else. Night is when thoughts get louder. Medieval life is physically exhausting but mentally repetitive. During the day, there is work. At night, there is space. Space to think about harvests, about illness, about taxes, about the local lord and whether he is feeling generous this year, about God, always about God. Religious belief wraps tightly around the night. Darkness is symbolic. It is tempting. It is dangerous. Evil prefers it, or so everyone is told. Night prayers are common. People cross themselves before sleep. Charms hang near beds. Words are spoken softly, carefully, because words have weight. Dreams are taken seriously. Night visions are messages, sometimes divine, sometimes troubling. A bad dream can stay with someone all day. A good dream is cautiously appreciated. No one assumes comfort lasts. In castles, the elite are having their own nighttime rituals. Guards rotate shifts, torches are replaced. Servants move quietly, carrying chamber pots, adjusting blankets, listening for bells. Bells mean someone needs something or someone is very unwell. Royal and noble insomnia is a recurring theme. Power does not make sleep easier. If anything, it complicates it. There are too many alliances to maintain, too many heirs to worry about, too many enemies who might prefer you do not wake up tomorrow. Thick walls help, but they do not stop thoughts. Kings wake in the night and pray, or they drink, or they stare at the ceiling, which is usually made of wood and beams and very little decoration. Queens wake in the night and listen for children breathing, or they lie still, thinking about whether they will be asked to produce another heir soon, which is not a romantic thought, but it is a practical one. Servants sleep lightly. They are trained to. A cry, a bell, a raised voice, and they are up. Their beds are closer to the floor, their blankets thinner, their rest conditional. The castle never fully sleeps, it just cycles. Outside, the castle looms. Its silhouette dominates the land even in darkness. For villagers, it is both protection and pressure. Knowing it is there is comforting. Knowing who lives inside it is less so. The night also belongs to storytellers. Around low fires, people speak softly. Tales are shared. Old ones, familiar ones. Stories about saints and sinners, about foolish kings, about clever peasants, about creatures that walk after dark. These stories are not meant to scare so much as explain. They give shape to the unknown. Children listen with wide eyes, half asleep, absorbing lessons about caution and obedience and the cost of wandering off. Adults listen too. Everyone does. Stories fill the silence. They keep the dark from pressing too close. Eventually, exhaustion wins. Bodies sink deeper into sleep. Fires dim further. The night reaches its deepest point, when even the stars seem tired. This is the hour people fear most, though they rarely say it out loud. The hour before dawn feels endless. And then, slowly, without ceremony, it begins to lift. The black fades to gray, shapes return. Birds start arguing with each other. Someone stirs. Another normal medieval night has passed without disaster, which is, quietly, a success. And as morning approaches, we start to see how nights like these shape generations, how growing up in this darkness molds rulers and subjects alike. Because when you're raised in a world where night is something to endure, not conquer, it leaves marks, and some of those marks end up wearing crowns. So let's keep drifting. Dawn is coming, and the people waking up into it are about to make history, whether they sleep well or not. Morning arrives without enthusiasm. There is no alarm clock, no gentle ramp-up. Dawn simply happens, and everyone adjusts. The light seeps in through cracks, through shutters that never quite close, through doorways that were never meant to keep warmth or brightness out. It is gray at first, then slightly less gray. Eventually, it becomes day. People wake in stages. Someone stirs, someone else pretends not to. Children are usually first, because they are either hungry or cold or both. Adults follow, bodies stiff, joints reminding them that yesterday happened. Sleep was sufficient, not refreshing. This is normal. Nobody expects to feel great in the morning. The fire is coaxed back to life. Embers glow, then catch. Smoke fills the room briefly, because chimneys are more of a suggestion than a solution. Someone coughs, someone else complains quietly. The day begins. For peasants, routine takes over immediately. Animals need tending, fields need attention. Tools are gathered, bread is broken. Breakfast is simple, repetitive, and necessary. There is no decision fatigue. There are no options. You eat what exists. The night is already receding from memory. Whatever fears felt enormous a few hours ago are packed away. You survived. That is enough. Today has its own concerns. In towns, the morning is louder. Doors open, shutters swing wide. Light reveals what the dark politely hid. Streets are worse than you remembered. Waste is visible again. Someone mutters about it, someone else steps around it. Life continues. Bells ring, markets prepare, tradespeople emerge. Bakers are already working, because bread waits for no one. The smell of baking drifts through the streets, briefly overpowering everything else. This is the best part of the day. It does not last. Travelers arrive early, having walked through the night or risen before dawn. They look tired. They are hungry. They are grateful to see walls and people and something that resembles safety. Gates open, guards yawn, names are checked loosely. Inside castles, mornings are structured performances. Lords and ladies rise with assistants. Clothing is layered carefully. Status is worn, literally. Servants move efficiently, practiced. Everyone pretends the night was restful. This is part of the job. Queens oversee households. Children are checked. Tutors arrive. Lessons begin. The next generation is shaped by repetition, expectation, and the memory of nights spent listening to the world outside their walls. Children of the elite grow up understanding that darkness is not empty. It is full of watchers, guards, servants, God. They learn to sleep despite noise, despite echoes, despite the knowledge that power attracts attention. For everyone, morning prayer is common. Thanks for survival, requests for protection, apologies for thoughts that wandered in the night. Faith is woven into the rhythm. It explains what cannot be controlled. The sun rises higher, shadows shrink. The night's power fades, but it never fully disappears. It waits. Tonight, it will return. It always does. And as we move forward, away from the general and toward the specific, we'll start meeting the people whose nights were stranger than most. Rulers who feared sleep, children who never slept alone, dynasties shaped by generations of restless nights under stone ceilings. If you were born into medieval Europe, night arrives before you understand what it is. You do not learn to fear it suddenly. You absorb it slowly, the way you absorb cold stone floors and smoky air and the sound of adults whispering about things you are not supposed to hear yet. Darkness is not a phase of the day, it is a condition you grow up inside. For peasant children, night is crowded. There are always bodies nearby. Siblings breathe too loudly, parents shift in their sleep, animals move and snort and remind you they exist. There is comfort in this, even when it smells faintly alarming. Being alone at night is rare, and when it happens, it feels wrong in a way that is hard to explain. These children learn early to fall asleep despite noise, despite discomfort, despite the knowledge that the world outside the walls is doing things without them. They learn that crying at night is not always rewarded. Sometimes it is noticed, sometimes it is not. You learn to self-soothe because everyone else is tired too. Elite children have a different arrangement, but not necessarily a calmer one. They sleep in chambers that are larger, colder, and quieter in unsettling ways. Servants sleep nearby, but not too nearby. There is space to feel small. There is space for echoes. Royal nurseries are watched carefully. Heirs are valuable. Spare heirs are also valuable, just slightly less so. Children are tucked in with ritual. Prayers are said. Blessings are given. Charms are placed discreetly. The night is treated as something that needs managing. Noble children are often afraid of the dark well past the age when modern children are expected to outgrow it. This is not considered childish, it is reasonable. The dark is full of meaning. Stories reinforce this. Religion reinforces this. The architecture reinforces this. Long corridors at night are not friendly places. Many royal children sleep with the lights on, metaphorically speaking. Torches burn outside doors. Candles glow behind curtains. Complete darkness is avoided when possible. The night is tolerated, not embraced. And these habits follow them. Kings who insist on lights burning, queens who wake frequently, rulers who prefer activity late into the night because lying still invites thoughts they do not want to entertain. Insomnia becomes tradition. Some monarchs develop elaborate nighttime routines. They pray at specific hours. They pace. They summon servants for conversation that is not urgent but feels necessary. Night becomes a time of private control in a world where public life is constant. Others dread it. They delay sleep. They drink. They distract themselves. They fear what the dark brings up from memory. Childhood sickness, night deaths, the sound of bells ringing at hours that mean someone did not make it. Because medieval children are very aware of death, it happens at night often. Fevers spike, breathing changes. A child who was playing earlier is suddenly quiet. Parents sit by beds, counting breaths, hoping morning comes in time. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. These experiences shape adults who associate night with uncertainty and loss. Even those who survive to rule carry that imprint. They do not romanticize sleep. They treat it like a risk that must be managed carefully. And so, royal courts adapt. Night watch systems expand. Guards are everywhere. Someone is always awake. Someone is always listening. Power does not sleep because it is afraid of what happens if it does. This constant vigilance feeds paranoia gently, slowly. If you grow up believing danger prefers darkness, you start seeing threats everywhere. Whispers sound louder at night. Footsteps feel closer than they should. Shadows linger longer than they should. Some rulers become obsessed with security. Locks, doors, patrols, secret passages that are meant for escape, but mostly add to the sense that escape might be needed at any moment. These habits are not quirks, they are learned behaviors. Others retreat inward. They become introspective, melancholic. Night thinkers. They write letters in odd hours. They compose prayers. They stare at candles until the wax pools and hardens, marking time in a way clocks never quite do. This is where dynastic weirdness begins, not with dramatic betrayals, but with sleeplessness, with children raised in darkness who never fully trust the light, with rulers who make decisions at 3 in the morning because that is when their minds feel most alive. And as we keep drifting forward, we'll start meeting these people more directly. The kings who ruled from their beds, the queens who feared the night more than their enemies, the heirs whose health was monitored obsessively after sunset. Because once you understand how medieval nights worked, a lot of medieval history starts making more sense. The anxiety, the caution, the fixation on lineage and survival. It all looks different when you realize how long the nights really were. So let the darkness settle again. We're not done with it yet. By the time we reach the upper levels of medieval society, night has stopped being a background condition and started becoming a management problem. A royal court does not simply go to bed. It transitions, slowly, carefully, with layers of people whose job it is to remain awake so someone important can feel safe enough to pretend to sleep. Castles at night are full of quiet movement. Footsteps echo down corridors that were never meant to be quiet. Torches are replaced before they die completely because letting one go out feels like an invitation. Doors are checked, then checked again. Keys are heavy and symbolic. Whoever holds them controls more than access. They control peace of mind. Kings often keep irregular hours. Some of this is necessity, some of it is habit. Councils meet late, messages arrive at inconvenient times. Decisions cannot always wait for morning. But a surprising amount of nighttime activity exists simply because the king is awake and everyone else must adapt. A restless king means a restless court. Servants stay alert, advisors linger, candles burn down faster than anyone would like. Wax is expensive, but so is displeasing a monarch who has been awake since the middle of the night thinking about treason. Queens experience the night differently. Their wakefulness is often quieter, less visible. They lie awake listening to the castle breathe. They remember pregnancies, losses, children who did not survive infancy. Night sharpens these memories. Daytime duties soften them. Night brings them back fully formed. Some queens sleep in separate chambers for long stretches of time, especially after childbirth. This is practical. It is also lonely. Their rooms are watched, their doors guarded. Privacy exists only in theory. The night belongs to everyone except the person trying to rest. Heirs are watched obsessively. Servants listen for breathing. A cough in the night prompts concern. A fever brings immediate response. The future of a dynasty can hinge on whether a child makes it through a single winter night. This constant vigilance creates tension that never fully releases. Court life during the day is rigid and ceremonial. At night, it becomes quietly anxious. Everyone is tired. Everyone is listening. Everyone knows that power shifts often begin in darkness. Assassinations at night are rare, but the fear of them is not. The idea matters more than the reality. Locks exist because people believe they are necessary. Guards are posted because someone might try something. Fear is a self-sustaining system. Some rulers lean into this. They cultivate mystery. They appear at night unexpectedly. They summon people without warning. They keep others off balance. Being unpredictable is a form of control. If no one knows when you sleep, no one knows when you are vulnerable. Others crumble under it. Insomnia becomes chronic. Paranoia grows slowly, fed by exhaustion. Night thoughts harden into certainties. Whispers are believed. Suspicions solidify. Decisions made in the early hours are rarely generous. This is how courts become dysfunctional without a single dramatic event, just years of poor sleep and constant tension. Advisors compete not just for influence, but for access during those late hours when the ruler is most receptive. Favor is earned by being awake when others are not. Servants adapt. Some become experts at moving silently. Others learn which floorboards to avoid. Some are permanently tired, existing in a state of half-sleep that blurs days together. They know the castle better at night than during the day. Outside the walls, the common people sleep, rise, work, and sleep again. Inside, the elite pace and worry and plan. Night separates rulers from subjects in a way daylight never quite does. Power is lonelier after sunset. Over time, this shapes governance. Laws reflect caution. Punishments are harsh because fear is familiar. Alliances are fragile because trust does not come easily to people who spend their nights listening for footsteps. And then there are those who try to escape it. Rulers who travel constantly, who sleep better on the road, oddly enough, because the danger feels honest there. The dark outside a tent is simpler than the dark inside a palace full of people with opinions. These habits pass down through generations. A sleepless king raises an anxious heir. A fearful queen teaches her children to listen too closely. Dynasties inherit night routines the way they inherit crowns. And as centuries pass, these patterns compound. By the time we reach some of the most famously strange royal families, the night has already done much of its work. It has shaped minds. It has narrowed options. It has encouraged certain kinds of decisions over others. So keep drifting with it. We are moving slowly toward the people whose personal lives became historical problems, the ones whose nights were so restless they echoed through history. The darkness has been patient, and it has plenty left to show us. By this point, the medieval night is no longer just a setting. It is an influence. It sits quietly behind decisions, habits, and personalities, shaping outcomes without ever needing credit. By the time someone reaches a throne, the night has already spent years training them. Rulers begin to associate darkness with truth. The day is public. The day is performance. The day belongs to ritual, ceremony, and people watching closely. Night, on the other hand, feels private, even when it isn't. At night, thoughts feel more honest simply because no one is applauding them. This is when rulers start making plans that feel inevitable in their own minds. Alliances that must happen. Enemies who clearly cannot be trusted. Marriages that feel strategically necessary despite every quiet instinct saying otherwise. Exhaustion makes certainty feel comforting. Letters written at night have a different tone. They are more personal, more rigid, sometimes more cruel. A king writing by candlelight at 2 a.m. is not the same man who smiles through court at noon. These letters survive. Historians read them later and wonder what happened. What happened was insomnia. Royal paranoia rarely announces itself loudly. It grows politely. It starts with extra guards, then more locked doors, then fewer confidants, then sudden mood shifts that courtiers learn to navigate carefully. Night reinforces all of this. If you cannot rest, you cannot reset. Queens especially carry the night differently. Many are married young, moved far from home, and placed into unfamiliar courts where the language, customs, and even sleeping arrangements are foreign. Night is when homesickness surfaces, when loneliness stretches out, when fears feel larger during the structured safety of daytime. Some queens become intensely religious at night. Prayer fills the silence. Others become withdrawn. Others cling fiercely to their children, especially sons, because they represent continuity in a world that feels unstable after dark. Children raised in these environments grow up absorbing tension without context. They hear whispers through walls. They sense anxiety in servants' movements. They learn that important things happen when the castle is quiet. They learn to listen more than speak. This creates adults who are observant, cautious, and often emotionally underdeveloped in strange ways. They understand power, but struggle with trust. They can rule territories, but cannot sleep alone. They inherit crowns and insomnia together. Medical understanding does not help. Medieval medicine is earnest but limited. Insomnia is treated with herbs, prayers, baths, bloodletting, and advice that mostly involves not thinking so much. None of this addresses the root cause, which is that being responsible for an entire realm is not relaxing. Nighttime illnesses add another layer. Fevers are terrifying after sunset. Doctors are summoned in the dark. Candles shake in unsteady hands. Treatments are attempted. Sometimes they work, sometimes they make things worse. Morning brings either relief or mourning. Deaths at night feel heavier. Bells ring at odd hours. Servants move faster but speak less. By morning, the castle has already adjusted. Black cloth appears. Schedules change. Someone new is suddenly important. These moments imprint deeply. A child who hears the night bell toll for a parent never quite hears nighttime silence the same way again. Darkness becomes associated with loss, not rest. Over generations, this creates families that are visibly tense. Rulers described as melancholy, suspicious, withdrawn, or erratic often share one thing in common. They do not sleep well. Their nights are crowded with memory and expectation. This is how dynasties become strange without realizing it, not through one bad ruler, but through centuries of poor rest layered on top of absolute power. The night does not cause madness. It nudges it gently. And as we continue drifting forward, we'll begin encountering specific royal families whose reputations reflect this long relationship with darkness. Families whose habits, marriages, and decisions start to look different once you imagine them pacing stone corridors long after everyone else has tried to sleep. So stay settled. The candle is still burning, and the night, as always, is not finished yet. By now, the medieval night has done its quiet work. It has shaped habits, sharpened anxieties, and taught generations of rulers how to exist in a state of permanent half-rest. So when we finally start to recognize the names that history remembers, it helps to imagine them not on thrones or battlefields, but awake, wrapped in blankets, listening to a draft move through stone. Take any well-known medieval monarch, and you can usually trace their oddities back to the hours when the castle was quiet and their thoughts were not. These are not people who made decisions after a full 8 hours of peaceful sleep. They made decisions after pacing, praying, and staring into candle flames until dawn felt like relief. Many famous kings were described as moody, withdrawn, or suspicious. Chronic nighttime wakefulness explains a lot of this without needing dramatic labels. A ruler who rarely sleeps deeply is irritable by default. Small problems feel larger, delays feel intentional, silence feels threatening. Courtiers learn quickly when not to speak. A king who has been awake since midnight does not want optimism. He wants confirmation. He wants reassurance that his worries are shared. The easiest way to stay in favor is to validate whatever he decided during the night. This is how bad ideas survive daylight. Queens remembered as cold or distant often spent years sleeping lightly, listening for children who might not make it through another winter. Emotional restraint becomes a survival skill. Attachment is risky when the night has taught you how quickly things disappear. Some rulers develop elaborate bedtime rituals that border on superstition, specific prayers in a specific order, objects placed precisely, doors locked and unlocked multiple times. These habits are not mocked by contemporaries, they are understood. Everyone is managing the dark in their own way. Others surround themselves with people at night. Musicians are summoned, readers are called in, stories are requested, silence is avoided. Being alone with one's thoughts is the real danger. Royal children notice all of this. They see parents who never truly relax. They absorb the lesson that rest is earned, not assumed, that vigilance is virtue. By the time they inherit power, they already know how to be tired. This exhaustion seeps into marriage choices. Political matches are arranged late at night, when caution feels wise and affection feels optional. The result is unions that function on paper and falter in practice. Emotional distance becomes normal. Bedrooms become formal spaces. The night also shapes how rulers see their subjects. Darkness divides. The elite sleep behind walls and guards. The common people sleep wherever exhaustion claims them. This separation grows sharper at night. It reinforces hierarchy. It makes empathy harder. And yet, the same darkness humbles everyone eventually. A fever does not care about rank. A bad night does not spare crowns. Rulers who cannot sleep are reminded, quietly, that control has limits. This awareness sometimes produces compassion. A sleepless king might reduce taxes after a long night of thinking about hardship. A sleepless queen might fund hospitals or convents. These moments exist, they just do not get as much attention. More often, fatigue produces rigidity. Laws tighten, punishments increase. Order becomes a substitute for rest. If the world can be controlled, maybe the night will feel less threatening. As we move further along, the pattern becomes clearer. The medieval night does not create villains or heroes. It creates people who are shaped by long hours of quiet and responsibility. People who learn to live with fear without calling it that. And the families that history later describes as dysfunctional, inbred, or tragically strange are often just families who have been tired for centuries. The night has been whispering to them the entire time. So let's keep drifting forward, deeper into those lineages, the ones where sleeplessness becomes tradition, where habits harden into traits, where the dark stops being something endured and becomes something inherited. The candle is still steady, the castle is still breathing, and the night, patient as ever, is waiting for us to notice what it has already done. As we settle deeper into this pattern, it becomes clear that medieval nights are not just individual experiences. They are inherited. Children grow up absorbing the rhythms of the households they are born into. They learn, almost unconsciously, how to lie awake and think, how to brace themselves against shadows, how to listen for the smallest noises. By the time they inherit titles or lands, they already know the language of darkness. In powerful families, this inheritance takes on a subtle but noticeable shape. Kings and queens who have grown up in castles with constant nighttime vigilance expect the same from their own children. Heirs are watched, monitored, and guided even as the household sleeps. Every cough, every stir, every small sound has significance. The dark is never neutral. It has memory. This creates people who move through life with a heightened awareness. They are attuned to timing, to quiet, to nuance. They can read small gestures and hear whispered conversations. Some rulers use this attentiveness wisely, others less so. The difference is often barely perceptible, but it accumulates over time. Dynastic dynamics also reflect this inherited tension. Siblings grow up learning when it is safe to speak and when it is better to remain silent. They observe the nighttime habits of parents, sometimes adopting them fully, sometimes resisting, always influenced. A court that rises at dawn to ceremony may have children whose internal clocks are still set by midnight prayers, nocturnal pacing, or whispered advice from sleepless adults. The influence of night extends into decision-making as well. Choices made after long hours of wakefulness in the dim glow of candlelight are different from those made after rest. Sleep deprivation sharpens some forms of clarity and dulls others. Historical outcomes, alliances, laws, marriages carry these imprints quietly across years and decades. Even minor obsessions gain traction. Some rulers become fixated on security, noticing small gaps in walls or protocols. Others develop strange aversions, a deep unease with being alone or a need for constant company. These behaviors, nurtured in darkness, eventually come to be interpreted as quirks, eccentricities, or even evidence of poor temperament, when really they are adaptations. It is in this context that dynastic eccentricities start to make more sense. Lineages described as troubled or peculiar often reflect centuries of inherited patterns: sleeplessness, anxiety, vigilance, and the quiet insistence of the dark on being acknowledged. The world of daylight, the one historians can observe easily, is only part of the story. Night has been shaping events silently all along. And so the patterns we recognize in historical records, odd marriages, suspicious behaviors, dynastic feuds, fragile heirs, are not anomalies. They are the echoes of thousands of nights spent in drafty corridors, listening, waiting, and learning the rhythms of a world that is quieter, slower, and more consequential than anyone in the daytime ever realizes. As we continue, the night begins to intersect with other pressures: politics, inheritance, illness. Each layer adds nuance to the lives of the people it touches. And yet, the fundamental truths of the dark remain constant. It is patient, it observes, and it shapes those who live within it in ways that are subtle, continuous, and unavoidable. The candle flickers softly, the castle walls settle, and through it all the night continues, carrying with it the experiences, fears, and habits that define generations. Soon we will meet the rulers and heirs whose private nights left marks far more visible than they ever intended. The night is long, and it is far from finished. As the centuries pass, we begin to see how nighttime routines are not only habitual, but ritualized. In many castles, bedtime is approached like a carefully orchestrated ceremony, especially for heirs. These rituals are less about comfort and more about control, about shaping behavior in a world where every hour of the dark is potentially significant. Heirs are tucked in with precision. Their bedding is arranged carefully, blankets layered to balance warmth and vigilance, pillows fluffed just enough to remind them that they are being watched. Servants stationed nearby, sometimes in full view, sometimes just outside the chamber, listening. Every cough, every sigh, every stir in the night is noted, often recorded in hushed whispers that are never meant for the child's ears, but inevitably are. Many royal children wake during the night. This is normal. Segmented sleep is the medieval standard. A child who rises quietly might pray, might sit up to listen, might wander the room imagining the courtiers, the animals, the drafts, and the unknown shapes lurking just beyond the candlelight. Some of them are punished for this wandering. Some are rewarded with gentle reassurance. The lesson is the same either way. The night is significant, and attention is never optional. In these families, awareness is cultivated. Children learn to notice the faintest creaks of doors. They distinguish between harmless animal noises and human intrusions. They measure wind against the sound of shutters.
They understand, often before they can articulate it, that every minute of darkness carries meaning. This awareness can become a source of anxiety as well as preparation. Heirs grow up anticipating crises that may never arrive. They develop habits that later look eccentric: pacing, late-night letters, sudden bursts of decision-making at odd hours. These behaviors are often recorded by chroniclers with a tone of mild judgment or bewilderment, but in reality, they are logical adaptations to centuries of inherited patterns. Some rulers, having internalized these lessons, begin to apply them to governance. They rise before dawn, spend hours in quiet council, or write detailed instructions for matters that will not even be addressed until days later. Night thinking informs day action. What seems obsessive is often deeply strategic. Fatigue does not erase insight. It sharpens the mind in certain ways, particularly for rulers who understand the rhythm of caution, anticipation, and surveillance. Yet the psychological weight of the night is uneven. Children who grow up with constant vigilance often carry a residual anxiety into adulthood. They become suspicious of messengers, cautious with advisors, and overly meticulous in matters of inheritance. Small errors which might be ignored by someone less shaped by darkness can feel catastrophic. In this way, the night does more than influence daily routines. It quietly structures personality, temperament, and priorities for life. Even leisure is affected. Music played late in the evening is subdued. Reading is done under candlelight that flickers just enough to be visible, but never so brightly as to feel indulgent. Games are quiet and conversations are hushed. Night is simultaneously a private space and a monitored one. As the castle sleeps, or at least appears to, the walls themselves seem to pulse with vigilance. Guards on rotation, candles burning low, the occasional whispered exchange, all create a soundscape of quiet activity that teaches children, heirs, and courtiers that darkness is never idle. They learn to inhabit it without being overwhelmed, and in the process, inherit centuries of behavioral conditioning. By the time these children reach actual power, they are highly attuned to the subtleties of nighttime influence. Insomnia, careful observation, whispered fears, and inherited habits combine into a distinct style of rule, one cautious, sometimes erratic, but always informed by long, lonely hours spent listening, observing, and surviving. And so the night, patient and unassuming, continues its quiet shaping. It creates rulers who can act decisively in daylight because they have already rehearsed scenarios in darkness. It creates heirs who fear mistakes because mistakes are louder in the quiet hours. It creates dynasties where the personal and the political are inseparable from the rhythms of the long night. Let's drift further. Soon we'll meet the actual faces of these inherited behaviors, kings, queens, and heirs, whose private nights were almost as influential as their public decisions. The candle burns steadily, the darkness stretches onward, and history, it seems, is written just as much in the night as in the day.
By this point, the influence of night on medieval life is no longer subtle. It is woven into the very fabric of dynasties. The rhythm of darkness, the quiet hours filled with watchfulness, anxiety, and careful observation, shapes how rulers act, how households function, and how families carry themselves across generations. Night becomes an inheritance almost as tangible as a crown. Many royal families are remembered in history for eccentricities, obsessions, or strange habits. Some of these behaviors seem inexplicable at first glance, until you consider the nights that produced them. A king pacing corridors at 2 a.m. is not simply restless. He is practicing vigilance learned as a child, rehearsing crises rehearsed for generations. A queen who refuses to sleep without light or prayer is not paranoid. She is continuing a tradition of caution passed down quietly through centuries. The more powerful a family, the more elaborate its nightly rituals become. Guards are stationed in tiers, sometimes unseen even by the ruler. Candles and torches are rotated on a precise schedule. Advisors are summoned for late-night councils, even if no pressing matter exists, because the ruler's mind feels most alert under the dim glow of wax. Sleep in these households is less a restorative act and more a managed procedure. Dynastic anxieties are reinforced by inheritance patterns. Children watch adults respond to night with vigilance and quiet stress. They mimic those behaviors. By the time they inherit responsibilities of their own, they have already internalized the rhythms of alertness, suspicion, and careful observation. This repetition builds families that are unusually attuned to danger, meticulous in planning, and highly sensitive to small disturbances, both real and imagined. In practical terms, this attention to nighttime detail affects governance. Late-night councils produce decrees, laws, and orders written under the glow of candlelight. Letters sent at unusual hours carry authority precisely because they emerge from a time when distractions are minimal, and the ruler's attention is intensely focused. Missteps by advisors are noticed quickly and remembered. Sleep-deprived certainty becomes a powerful tool. But there's a cost. Chronic sleeplessness and vigilance breed irritability, paranoia, and occasional overreach. Decisions made in the long hours before dawn are rarely tempered by the distractions or negotiations of daytime life. Mistakes can be amplified, yet interpreted as deliberate or clever, depending on the courtly politics of the moment. Some rulers adapt by creating comfort zones, private chambers fortified with guards, layers of bedding, and dedicated attendants. Others do the opposite, pacing endlessly, walking corridors, or keeping company late into the night. Both approaches have consequences. The first encourages careful planning. The second fosters anxiety and unpredictability. Both become a template for the next generation. Even minor events, like a child's illness or a servant's mistake, are magnified in darkness. Night amplifies memory and emotion. A cough that might be ignored during daylight hours can dominate thoughts for hours. Decisions about care, succession, and discipline are informed as much by fear and attentiveness at night as by reason in the morning. The inheritance of night extends beyond the walls of a castle. It reaches marriages, alliances, and political strategy. Heirs who have learned vigilance early are cautious about whom they trust. Marriages are negotiated not only for property or politics, but with an almost unconscious assessment of reliability in the dark hours. Alliances are maintained with attention to subtle cues, habits, and signals, many of which are noticed late at night when vigilance is highest. Over time, entire dynasties carry a collective imprint of the night. Behaviors that may appear irrational, eccentric, or peculiar are often the echoes of centuries of nocturnal influence. Patterns of careful observation, anxiety, and strategic alertness persist, not because of temperament alone, but because long hours of darkness shaped the way rulers experience the world. The candle flickers softly, reminding us that even as the night seems passive, it is shaping everything quietly. The corridors are still. The castle breathes, and through every century, every ruler, every heir, the night has continued to leave its imprint, subtle, persistent, and unavoidable. As we drift further into history, the individuals shaped by these inherited nights will begin to emerge. The kings whose sleeplessness influenced entire realms, the queens whose quiet anxieties dictated policy, the heirs whose awareness of shadows determined the fates of families and nations alike. The night is patient. It waits, and it continues to shape history in ways that daylight never can. By now, it is clear that night has been more than a backdrop in medieval Europe. It has been a teacher, shaping rulers, heirs, and entire dynasties with patience, subtlety, and persistence. Its lessons are quiet but effective: vigilance, caution, observation, and a peculiar attention to detail. These are skills that no classroom could teach, but the darkness insists upon them night after night. Children in these households grow up learning from the night itself, often without realizing it. The quiet hours between midnight and dawn are filled with indirect instruction. A child who observes a servant nervously checking a door learns to notice small movements. A child who listens to parents pace while whispering to advisors learns that thought and action are inseparable. These lessons are absorbed unconsciously, internalized as instinct rather than taught in words. Royal tutors take advantage of this attentiveness. Lessons often happen in dimly lit chambers. Reading by candlelight, memorizing prayers, and recounting genealogies late into the night instill discipline. The eye grows accustomed to details, the mind grows accustomed to quiet observation, and the child grows accustomed to the long, patient hours when nothing happens except preparation. Sleep is segmented. The night is a training ground. This is how dynasties cultivate rulers who are alert and precise, but also cautious to a fault. They can plan elaborate campaigns or negotiate difficult treaties because they have spent countless hours rehearsing contingencies internally. But they are also often prone to suspicion and paranoia because darkness teaches vigilance more effectively than trust. Every sound becomes a potential signal. Every shadow a potential threat. Even minor rituals reinforce these lessons. A candle extinguished too early becomes a cautionary tale. A misstep in arranging bedding or blankets is remembered. A servant's hesitation during night duties is noted and influences expectations. Over time, the family develops a collective consciousness informed by night. Careful, measured, wary, and meticulous. Some rulers channel this awareness productively. They are strategic, precise, and deliberate. They notice subtle shifts in loyalty, alliances, and circumstance that others overlook. They act decisively because their minds are accustomed to thinking in the quiet hours, where distraction is minimal and consequences feel immediate. The night becomes an incubator of focus. Others suffer under its weight. Sleeplessness fosters irritability, mood swings, and obsession. Night amplifies anxieties that daylight might otherwise dilute. Miscommunication in the castle or court feels catastrophic. Decisions taken in exhaustion are interpreted as intentional severity. The result is dynasties with reputations for eccentricity, cruelty, or unpredictability. Often these reputations obscure the simpler truth. They are products of centuries of inherited nightly vigilance. Even more subtly, night shapes relationships within the family. Siblings learn to compete quietly for attention. Parents unconsciously favor the child who adapts best to nocturnal routines. Heirs who excel at alertness are groomed for greater responsibility. Those who struggle learn caution, deferment, or withdrawal. In this way, night enforces hierarchy, teaches obedience, and fosters traits that persist into adulthood. Courtiers, too, are shaped by nocturnal life. They learn when it is safe to speak and when to remain silent. They understand that their observations, delivered in whispers or at precisely the right hour, carry more weight than brash proclamations in daylight. Subtlety is rewarded. Alertness is rewarded. Composure under long hours of quiet pressure becomes a measure of competence. Ultimately, night teaches patience and endurance. It teaches the lesson that control is temporary and effort must be continuous. Mistakes cannot be corrected retroactively, but attentiveness can prevent catastrophe. For rulers, heirs, and households alike, this lesson is woven into the very rhythm of life, imperceptible to outsiders, but unmistakable to those living within it. So as the candle flickers softly and shadows stretch along the stone walls, remember that the night has been more than a mere pause in daily life. It has been a patient, silent tutor. Its lessons are slow, subtle, and persistent, but they endure. They prepare those who inherit power, instill habits in children, and shape entire dynasties without ever drawing their attention to themselves. And as we continue drifting through these quiet, candlelit histories, we will soon see how these lessons manifest in the lives of rulers whose choices, marriages, and behaviors are unmistakably molded by long, restless nights. The night has been patient, and it has many stories left to tell. As we continue drifting through these long nights, it becomes clear that darkness does more than shape behavior. It shapes the very spaces in which medieval people live. Architecture, layout, and even furniture are influenced by the night, by its rhythms, by its persistent insistence that vigilance is necessary. Castles, manors, and even modest homes are designed with nighttime in mind, though the design is subtle. Corridors are long, narrow, and echoing. Doors are thick, sometimes double-layered. Windows are small and shuttered, admitting light during the day, but controlling both visibility and draft at night. Staircases are steep, uneven, and often deliberately indirect. These features are not intended to cause discomfort, though they often do. They serve instead as reminders. Movement must be deliberate. Awareness must be constant. The night rewards attentiveness and punishes carelessness. Chambers are similarly organized. Beds are raised on platforms, curtained for warmth and privacy. Bedding is layered, not for comfort alone, but to create controlled microenvironments in which sleep can occur safely. Blankets are thick, sometimes rough, sometimes smelly, but they are necessary. Pillows are dense, sometimes embroidered with familial symbols, reminders of lineage and expectation. The smallest objects, candles, utensils, and cushions, take on significance after dark. Everything has a purpose. Everything is watched. Even minor architectural details reinforce these lessons. A floorboard that creaks differently at night teaches caution. A narrow hallway encourages movement with care. A torch bracket in an unexpected location serves as both illumination and a subtle test of observation. Courtiers and children learn quickly to interpret these environmental cues, often without conscious thought. The castle itself becomes a teacher, a silent participant in the nocturnal education of its inhabitants. And of course, there are secret spaces, hidden staircases, alcoves, passages behind walls. These are not always used for dramatic escapes. Sometimes they exist simply because vigilance demands options. They are opportunities for safety, observation, or quiet reflection. Children and heirs grow up aware of these spaces. They learn where shadows are trustworthy and where they are not. The night trains them to see beyond what is immediately visible. Nighttime in medieval Europe also fosters an awareness of sound. Wooden floors, stone walls, and corridors amplify small noises. Footsteps, whispers, distant laughter, and the shifting of animals all become meaningful signals. A servant dropping a tray in the middle of the night is not simply a nuisance, it is a disturbance in the ecosystem of the castle, a reminder that attention is required even in the quietest hours. Smell, too, becomes more prominent after sunset. Smoke from candles and fires clings to the walls. The scent of tallow, wood, and damp stone permeates everything. Food smells linger from earlier meals, slowly mingling with odors of animals and humans alike. Children learn to distinguish these scents, to interpret them, to understand when something is amiss. The night sharpens all senses. Even the rhythms of daily life are governed by this nocturnal consciousness. Activities during daylight are arranged so that night, when unpredictability reigns, can be managed. Children's chores, servant rotations, guard schedules, and even leisure are organized with an understanding that darkness is a persistent factor, not a backdrop. This pervasive awareness of night teaches adaptability. Those who grow up with it develop patience, observation, and caution. But it also fosters anxiety, meticulousness, and sometimes obsession. Many rulers and heirs later described as eccentric, controlling, or peculiar are in fact products of centuries of nocturnal conditioning. Their environments, habits, and behaviors are inseparable from the rhythms of darkness in which they were raised. And so, the castle itself, the walls, floors, and corridors participate in the education of its inhabitants. The night is not passive, it is active. It shapes thought, behavior, and perception through spatial cues, sounds, smells, and the persistent requirement for awareness. As we continue, we will meet the people whose lives were most defined by these nocturnal influences. The heirs who learned vigilance before they could walk. The rulers whose obsessions can be traced back to candlelit nights. And the families whose every decision, alliance, and habit bears the subtle, persistent imprint of the long European night. The candle continues to burn softly. The shadows stretch along the stone walls, and the night, patient as ever, remains an invisible but undeniable force in the shaping of history. As the long shadows of medieval Europe stretch across centuries, it becomes increasingly clear that the night is more than an absence of sunlight. It is a force, patient, silent, and subtly insistent, shaping the rhythms of life, the habits of households, and the very personalities of those destined to rule. To understand medieval history fully, one must understand the nights in which it was made. The dynasties that ruled across Europe were in many ways defined by the habits they inherited from the darkness. Children were trained from birth to recognize the importance of vigilance. Sleep was never a given. Night was a teacher, a trainer, a quiet enforcer. Even the youngest heirs absorbed lessons that would carry them through adulthood, influencing decisions, temperament, and leadership style. Royal children often slept in chambers designed with both protection and surveillance in mind. Beds were elevated, sometimes curtained, layered with blankets and bolsters. Servants were stationed nearby, listening for coughs, murmurs, or sudden movements. A child who stirred at 2 a.m. might find a hand on their shoulder, a quiet reminder that they were being watched, or a whispered question about their comfort. Even minor nocturnal movements were not trivial. They were part of a continuous assessment of readiness and health. Sleep itself was segmented. Unlike modern interrupted patterns, medieval rest came in fragments, broken by noise, draft, or duty.
Children might rise during the night, whether from discomfort, hunger, or curiosity, and move cautiously through corridors that were simultaneously familiar and unfamiliar in the dim glow of candlelight. They learned quickly that even small sounds were meaningful. A footstep from an ally might be welcome. A shadow from a stranger might signal danger. Awareness was cultivated as a matter of survival. These habits were reinforced through observation. Heirs watched parents, guardians, and servants navigate the night. They noted how a king might pace the corridors before dawn, reviewing plans in silence, attending to letters or listening intently for news delivered by trusted messengers. They observed queens quietly supervising children or organizing the household, maintaining a constant awareness of what might go wrong. Every gesture, every small ritual, every act of caution was recorded, consciously or unconsciously, in the minds of the next generation. Tutors participated in the nocturnal education as well. Lessons often occurred in candlelit chambers. Children memorized prayers, genealogies, and histories under the soft, flickering light. Reading and writing exercises stretched late into the night, cultivating patience and concentration. The candle's flame became a quiet marker of time and progress, a signal of discipline, focus, and endurance. Sleep, when it came, was a learned compromise between necessity and observation. This combination of vigilance and ritual created dynasties defined by careful observation and meticulous planning. Kings and queens who rose to power were not simply inheriting territory, they were inheriting centuries of nocturnal conditioning. Their awareness, caution, and sometimes paranoia were products not just of temperament, but of centuries of experience filtered through the long, quiet hours of the night. Yet there was a cost. Chronic sleeplessness and constant vigilance brought fatigue, irritability, and heightened sensitivity to perceived slights. Mistakes, whether trivial or consequential, were magnified in the mind of someone accustomed to long hours of alertness. A courtesan's misstep, a servant's hesitation, or even a sibling's noise could provoke disproportionate reactions, because the night amplifies anxieties that daylight might dilute. Historians often interpret these behaviors as eccentricity or cruelty, when in reality they are adaptations to centuries of inherited nocturnal vigilance. In practical terms, this shaped governance. Kings who could not sleep often used the night to write letters, make decrees, or plan strategies. The quiet hours allowed concentration free from distraction, but also removed the moderating influence of daylight counsel and social checks. Decisions made in the dim glow of candlelight carried authority and urgency precisely because they emerged from a context of heightened awareness. Mistakes were possible, but deliberate action was also more achievable. Queens, too, navigated these nocturnal pressures with finesse, even when they did not have official power. Many were responsible for the safety, health, and discipline of children. They monitored illness, arranged care, and sometimes acted as silent advisors in matters of state. Their nighttime vigilance was as critical as the king's, though less publicly acknowledged. Sleep-deprived queens passed down their habits to their children, instilling awareness, caution, and alertness as part of familial expectation. Children who grew up in these households internalized both the lessons and the anxieties of night. They developed acute awareness of their environment, subtle judgment of human behavior, and an instinct for assessing risk. They learned that vigilance was a virtue, that quiet observation was powerful, and that lapses in attention could carry serious consequences. Over generations, these habits coalesced into dynasties characterized by caution, precision, and at times obsession. The night also influenced social behavior. Courtiers, aware that rulers were more attentive and decisive during nocturnal hours, adjusted their own conduct. Whispers, gestures, and subtle signals carried weight. Those who understood the rhythms of the dark gained advantage. Those who did not learned slowly or suffered consequences. Observation, discretion, and patience were cultivated traits, honed over years of silent nights. Even minor architectural details reinforced these patterns. Narrow corridors, creaking floors, and hidden staircases taught caution. Torches placed strategically provided light, but also served as markers of observation. Sleeping chambers were designed with both comfort and control in mind. Furniture was arranged to facilitate ease of movement and attention. The castle itself became a participant in nocturnal training, subtly shaping perception, behavior, and expectation.
Nighttime illness added further influence. A fevered child required immediate attention. A servant's misjudgment could cost comfort or health. The constant possibility of misfortune reinforced vigilance and responsibility. Families internalized these pressures, passing them down as traits that were perceived externally as prudence, obsession, or eccentricity. Dynasties described in historical records as strange, cruel, or peculiar were often simply shaped by centuries of nocturnal influence. Their habits, anxieties, and attentiveness to detail were adaptive responses to the realities of life in darkness. Eccentricity in this context is not an aberration, but an expected outcome. Night trained them, guided them, and sometimes dictated their behaviors in subtle but consistent ways. Marriage practices were also affected. Heirs who grew up with deep awareness of night and danger were cautious in their alliances. Marriages were negotiated not only for political advantage, but with an unconscious assessment of trust, reliability, and attentiveness in private, low-light circumstances. Decisions that might seem irrational in daylight are often entirely consistent with patterns of inherited vigilance and nighttime awareness. Even diplomacy was influenced. Letters written after midnight, consultations held in candlelight, and decisions taken during hours of solitude carried authority because they emerged from uninterrupted concentration. Fatigue sharpened focus in some ways, dulled it in others, and created the peculiar rhythm of decision-making that defines many medieval chronicles. Over centuries, this created dynasties whose behaviors, governance, and interactions were deeply entwined with their nocturnal conditioning. Rulers were cautious, observant, and meticulous. Families internalized vigilance as a virtue, often mistaking inherited caution for temperament. Heirs learned patience, discretion, and strategy as much from long nights as from formal education. Courtiers and servants developed habits attuned to the same cycles. Even seemingly minor eccentricities, obsessive attention to detail, fear of solitude, insistence on nightly rituals, can be traced to the influence of inherited night. Chroniclers observing these traits might attribute them to personality, but the truth is subtler. Centuries of nightly observation and vigilance produce habits that are difficult to separate from character. The night, patient and enduring, operates quietly across generations. It does not demand attention. It does not reward theatrics. It simply continues, shaping perception, guiding behavior, and influencing decisions in ways that daylight alone cannot achieve. The lessons of the dark, vigilance, awareness, patience, and caution become encoded in families, shaping dynasties for generations. By the time we meet historical figures known for their eccentricities, peculiar obsessions, or meticulous habits, we must remember that many of these traits are the legacies of long nights. Candlelight, creaking floors, whispered conversations, and careful observation all contribute to shaping individuals whose choices, marriages, and governance bear the subtle imprint of centuries of nocturnal experience. This inheritance of night does not manifest as dramatic madness or overt instability. It is quieter, subtler, and more pervasive. It manifests as caution, attentiveness, and a persistent sense of preparedness. It informs strategy, shapes relationships, and guides behavior. And eccentricity is, in many ways, just the external expression of an internalized rhythm honed by centuries of long, careful nights. And so, as the candle burns low and shadows stretch across the stone walls of the castle, it is worth remembering that the night is more than an absence of light. It is an enduring, patient tutor. Its lessons are slow, subtle, and relentless. It shapes children, guides rulers, molds dynasties, and imprints itself on the course of history. As we continue, the individuals shaped by these inherited nights will emerge more clearly. Kings, queens, and heirs whose vigilance, anxieties, and obsessions define both their private lives and public legacies. The quiet, candlelit hours that seem so insignificant at the moment are in retrospect the architects of dynastic behavior, governance, and historical reputation. The night remains patient, enduring, and insistent. The candle continues to flicker. The stone walls stretch their shadows, and through it all, history is quietly being shaped, not by daylight, not by war, but by the long, measured, and deliberate passage of the dark. And as we drift further into these histories, we will begin to meet specific rulers whose habits, marriages, and decisions are unmistakably informed by centuries of nocturnal vigilance, proving that the night, patient and enduring, is perhaps the most persistent force in medieval Europe. Now that we have drifted through centuries of inherited vigilance, quiet castles, and careful observation, it is time to meet the people whose lives were most shaped by these long nights. These are the monarchs and heirs whose private hours had a profound, if subtle, influence on their public actions, their marriages, their families, and ultimately, the course of history. Take, for example, Charles VI of France, sometimes called Charles the Mad, though the nickname oversimplifies centuries of inherited nocturnal pressure. He inherited not only the throne, but a family trained to regard night with vigilance, to associate darkness with threat, to expect crises during hours when the rest of the world slept. Charles's long bouts of instability, his sudden retreats into isolation, and his obsessive attention to personal safety can be traced, in part, to this environment. Nights spent in silent observation, pacing corridors, and listening to whispers in stone chambers are not dramatic inventions. They are the quiet foundation of his psyche. Similarly, Mary, Queen of Scots, spent countless nights awake in cold Scottish castles, anticipating plots, listening for footsteps, and worrying for her children. Her nocturnal habits shaped both her temperament and her political choices. Decisions that appear impulsive or emotionally driven may, in fact, reflect years of experience conditioned by nights that required extreme attentiveness, caution, and quiet vigilance. The night teaches lessons that daylight cannot, and Mary absorbed them fully. Even more subtly, consider the Habsburg heirs, many of whom were described as frail, anxious, or peculiar. These characteristics are often attributed to inbreeding alone, but the long hours of night contribute as much as genetics. Children raised under constant observation in drafty stone chambers with servants monitoring their every movement learn caution as a survival mechanism. They develop heightened awareness, meticulous habits, and anxieties that influence how they rule as adults. Night shapes personalities slowly, cumulatively, across generations. The long nights also influenced marital alliances. Rulers who grew up learning vigilance and observing the world in dim light assessed potential spouses in subtle ways that are invisible to the historical record. Trustworthiness, reliability, quiet attentiveness, all traits shaped by nocturnal upbringing, became deciding factors in marriage negotiations. What might seem irrational to modern eyes, such as sudden breaks in engagement or extreme preference for certain partners, is often a reflection of inherited nighttime lessons. These monarchs evaluated their alliances through a lens formed by centuries of observation in darkness. Nighttime anxiety also guided political strategy. Kings and queens were often at their most attentive and analytical in the candlelit hours before dawn. Letters written at midnight could carry decisive instructions. Diplomacy conducted during the quiet of the night allowed uninterrupted thought. Small details, unnoticed by day-bound observers, could make or break a treaty. The night rewarded patience, attention, and deliberate reflection, and those who inherited these habits became formidable rulers, even if history remembers them as eccentric or overly cautious. Interestingly, many monarchs also internalized the fears and anxieties of previous generations. Heirs raised in households where night was synonymous with danger or illness carry these associations into adulthood. Pacing corridors, requesting guards remain nearby, insisting on ritualized observation, and avoiding solitude became ingrained habits. Chroniclers might describe these behaviors as quirks, but they are actually inherited strategies for coping with uncertainty, taught slowly over centuries of nightly vigilance. The night also influenced health and well-being. Sleeplessness, tension, and drafty stone chambers contributed to frailty, illness, and emotional sensitivity. Children who survived such conditions emerged adults with heightened alertness, but also vulnerability to stress. This explains why so many royal lineages appear unusually delicate or temperamental in historical records. Night is both teacher and burden, fostering resilience while exacting a subtle toll. Yet not all consequences were negative. The attentiveness instilled by centuries of nocturnal vigilance produced rulers who were strategic, observant, and capable of long-term planning. Minor details that might be ignored by those accustomed to unbroken sleep were noticed and acted upon. Alliances were negotiated with care, successions were managed meticulously, threats, real or imagined, were anticipated. The night taught skills that daylight alone could not. Even seemingly trivial behaviors, insistence on candlelight, repeated checks of doors, late-night letters, or midnight audiences can be traced back to centuries of inherited nighttime practice. These habits appear eccentric, but they are rational in the context of a household trained to regard darkness as consequential. The night rewards preparation and punishes inattentiveness, and rulers who internalized this lesson learned to approach both personal and political life with caution and precision. Children growing up in these households learned, too, that observation was power. A glance, a whisper, a slight hesitation, all could carry meaning. Heirs internalized these lessons slowly, assimilating both the anxieties and the attentiveness of the night. By the time they inherited responsibilities, they were preconditioned to interpret subtle signals, anticipate danger, and make decisions under pressure. These skills, invisible to casual observers, became central to their ability to govern effectively. Courtiers and attendants likewise learned to navigate the quiet hours. Speaking at the wrong time could invite rebuke. Silence, maintained just long enough, could earn favor. Observing the subtle cues of a sleepless ruler became an art form. The night, it seems, trains everyone it touches. Its lessons are patient, consistent, and unavoidable. Even the architecture of castles and manors reinforced this training. Long corridors, creaking staircases, hidden doors, narrow hallways, and drafty chambers all taught attentiveness. Noise, light, shadow, and draft became teachers. The environment itself was a participant in nocturnal education, reinforcing the same patterns of vigilance, caution, and attentiveness that were inherited from previous generations. In some cases, inherited nocturnal habits intersected with illness and fragility to produce rulers whose private anxieties became public eccentricities. Chroniclers describe kings who slept poorly, queens who paced chambers, and heirs who insisted on guards remaining nearby. These are not merely quirks, they are cumulative behaviors shaped by centuries of night, inherited awareness, and environmental cues.
The consequences for history are subtle but significant. Decisions made in candlelit chambers, marriages negotiated under the quiet pressure of inherited vigilance, and policies influenced by attention to detail rather than instinct, all reflect the enduring impact of nocturnal conditioning. Historians may focus on wars, treaties, and public events, but the unseen influence of the night is equally consequential. Even when rulers appeared idle during the day, much of their thinking, planning, and observation occurred under the cover of darkness. The night is patient, unhurried, and thorough. It fosters reflection and analysis in a way daylight cannot. The monarch who seems passive in public may be intensely active in private, rehearsing responses, assessing allies, and evaluating potential threats long before dawn. This pattern is evident in families across Europe. The Habsburgs, the Bourbons, the Valois, and many others exhibit behaviors that are best understood as the product of inherited nightly vigilance. Attention to minor detail, obsessive concern for succession, careful monitoring of household members, and intense focus on alliances are all traits cultivated through long experience in the quiet hours. Yet the night is not cruel. It teaches resilience, awareness, and strategy as much as it fosters anxiety. Those who inherit these patterns learn to navigate complex social structures, anticipate danger, and act decisively. Their eccentricities, obsessions, and meticulous habits are often the outward manifestations of an internalized education that spans generations. Even simple rituals, writing letters at midnight, reviewing accounts by candlelight, pacing chambers before dawn, carry weight. They reflect inherited lessons in vigilance and careful observation. They produce rulers who are both careful and capable, whose actions are informed by centuries of nocturnal awareness. Night shapes the mind in ways that history rarely records, yet whose influence is impossible to ignore. Children growing up in these dynasties internalize this rhythm. They learn that darkness is consequential, that attention matters, that preparation and observation are vital. They grow into rulers who are attentive to detail, cautious in judgment, and sometimes anxious in ways modern observers might misinterpret. The night is both a teacher and a guide, a patient force that shapes decisions, behaviors, and legacies. And so the candle burns low, the corridors stretch long, and the shadows grow. The patient night continues its instruction, shaping rulers, heirs, and entire dynasties with quiet persistence. What might seem eccentric, obsessive, or peculiar to outsiders is in fact the inheritance of centuries of careful observation, nightly vigilance, and attentiveness to the subtle cues of a world that never fully rests. As we move forward, we will encounter more individual stories, the rulers who embodied centuries of nocturnal lessons, the heirs whose nightly training guided marriages and alliances, and the dynasties whose patterns of observation, anxiety, and vigilance defined both their private and public lives. The night, patient and persistent, remains an invisible force in the shaping of history, proving that darkness, more than any battle or treaty, leaves its mark across generations.